Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and what a beautiful morning it is. Welcome to our budget presentation this morning. For those of you who don't know, my name is Lexi Shaw. I'm managing partner at AC Mole, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this morning on behalf of AC Mole and Clarke Willmott. And as with our autumn statement, it's a hybrid event this morning, so I'm here to welcome all of you joining us from home as well. As well as welcoming you, it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers this morning, who many of you will know already. We have Amanda Gunter, tax partner at AC Mole, and Tom Chiffers from the private client team at Clarke Willmott. And I'm really looking forward to hear what they've both got to say in relation to the Chancellor's statement. I think it would be fair to say that the Chancellor's got quite a job on his hands at the moment. The coffers have been emptied somewhat off the back of the COVID pandemic. We've obviously had interest rate rises and spiralling inflation, it would be fair to say. I was at a Bank of England breakfast yesterday, and the Bank of England representative was talking about their forecast that they did in February, which wasn't actually that long ago. They were forecasting that inflation would reach 7.25%. And it was fair to say that yesterday they were honest in saying, actually, we've already gone back to the drawing board on that, and we're now talking about inflation being above 8%. Later in the year. So some quite significant challenges to be faced there, and a lot for the Chancellor to be considering. So really looking forward to hearing some of the insight that Tom and Amanda will have on that. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Amanda.
Good morning, everyone. As Lexi mentioned, I am Amanda Gunter, and I am one of the partners at AC Mole. So between Tom and I this morning, we are going to run through the key items that were mentioned in the spring statement, as well as giving you a bit of a recap of some previous announcements. Now, the spring statement this year was quite short because it wasn't a budget, and a number of people have mentioned to me this morning, well, you haven't really got much to talk about, have you? And that's very true. There wasn't an awful lot going on in there. Now, some of the opening comments, I think, as we expected from the Chancellor, were in relation to the war in Ukraine and how this is going to have a profound impact on both the UK economy and the worldwide economy. Now, you may like to note that the date of the spring statement was the second anniversary of the UK's first lockdown. Now, that seems like a very long time ago now, but the one thing we can say, COVID isn't yet a thing of the past, but COVID measures certainly were, because there was very little mention of any form of COVID measures within the spring statement. Now, considering it was only 2 years ago, that may have been quite a surprise that there were going to be no COVID measures mentioned. But when we consider that we've also got the war in Ukraine at the moment, I think it was possibly no surprise. So, the purpose of the spring statement is to run through the current position of the UK economy and our current finances. Now, I think rather predictably, the Chancellor tends to start with a couple of positive points in anything that he mentions with the budget or a spring statement. So we started with growth and unemployment. Now, growth is a bit of a mixed bag. So for last year, our growth was positive. So the Office for Budget Responsibilities, as of about 6 months ago, were forecasting our growth in 2021 to be 6.5%. We achieved 7.5%, so it was above the OBR's forecast. Now, this is in comparison to the 9% fall in growth that we saw in 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. Now, the downside to this is that as of 6 months ago, the OBR were forecasting growth for this year to be 6%. They have cut that significantly. So their forecast for the coming year is now only 3.8%, thanks to the current economic climate that we are seeing. The future forecasts thereafter are at 1.8% and 2.1%. Now, this is comparable to what they were saying 6 months ago. So the longer term growth is pretty much the same as what they were saying as of 6 months. But this current year is going to see a significant drop on what they were expecting. Unemployment has been a positive throughout. Now, this is partly because of the furlough scheme. So we didn't see the unemployment levels that we were potentially expecting thanks to COVID. And as of 6 months ago, the OBR thought that our unemployment would be roughly 5%. It's actually only at 3.9%. The OBR are also predicting that that rate will fall in each of the following years of the forecast. So we should be seeing unemployment as a percentage reducing year on year. Now, with the Chancellor starting with the positives, he obviously ignored one thing that's on everyone's mind: inflation. Now, I can remember standing here 6 months ago and I put up this slide. And you'll see on there that as of last October, we were looking at inflation of 4%. I can remember that Tom and I were talking, though only 6 months ago, of inflation hitting the high of 5%. And I can also remember talking to my daughter about the shopping carts and how it was going to impact on the costs of living. So our shopping trolley costing us an extra £4. But how things do change. So, as we are all aware, that in February this year, inflation hit 6.2%. Now, the OBR have predicted that the average for this year for inflation will be 7.4%. That we will see a high towards the end of this year of over 8%. So my shopping basket's on there. I did round down, so I went from £100 to £107. Now, that's not just the things that we are all going to feel. That every one of us has noticed that when we go and fill our car up at the petrol station, it's costing an awful lot more. We are also seeing the exponential rises in the prices of our light and heat. So inflation at 7.4%, I think on certain things it feels a lot more than that. We will see things continue on that vein for a little while. The Chancellor didn't say very much about borrowing and debt. In fact, he didn't say anything about the current debt position. He just went through our borrowing. Now, the borrowing basically means that we need more money from somewhere else other than our income to cover our costs. So we need additional money to cover all of our expenditure. For the current year, the OBR are predicting that we need to borrow 5.4% to cover our outgoings. They are predicting this to drop to 3.9% next year and then dropping in the following years thereafter. At no point did the Chancellor say we were going to reach a point where we were either at break-even or starting to repay our debt. As I've mentioned on there, we are continuing to require additional funding. This means we are adding to our debt each year. There isn't anything out at the moment that says what our current debt level is, because they wait until the end of March to announce. But on a rough estimate, our total debt, so the amount we owe, is going to be over £2.4 trillion. I don't even know how to put that into a calculator. But what I do know is one of the most sobering comments he said during this speech is about the interest on that debt. Next year, they are forecasting debt interest to be £83 billion. Now, last night I was thinking about this, and I thought, I wonder what that equates to in terms of our income. So I did a bit of Googling. Now, that is more than we raise in corporation tax, and it is more than we spend on education. I think that's quite horrifying. But also, what it shows is that we are very much affected by interest rate changes. So they will be focusing very carefully on any changes in interest rates, because if we were to see any interest rate changes, that debt interest is going to go up. And if we are continually borrowing for the foreseeable future, they're going to get worse. On that cheery note. Now, during the speech, the main thing that he was talking about is what the government can do to help. So he's looking to help all households with this cost of living increase that everyone is seeing. Now, he said during that, now you may remember 6 months ago, I mentioned social care levy. The social care levy is a 1.25% charge, which is in effect going to increase our national insurance contributions. The levy is being ring-fenced for the NHS. It was due to come in on the 6th of April. A lot of commentators basically said that they thought the government might delay this coming in to help households out. It didn't happen. So the Chancellor said, no, this is going to remain. And the reason he said it was going to remain is because it is ring-fenced directly for the NHS. But what he did go on then to say is, carrying on the national insurance theme, it would increase the national insurance threshold to £12,570, which brings it up to the same level as the personal allowance for income tax purposes. Now, this is something that the government have aimed to do over a period of time anyway. So what they were doing is bringing forward the increase so that we'd get it in one go. Now, you'll note on there that the increase is actually from this July. Thank you very much for complicating our lives on payroll. That does mean we have to change everything in July. So the rate for 22-23 is actually £11,908. We don't have any details yet of how that's going to work on all of our payrolls. I'm hoping that the software providers can just build that in. It should mean that everyone would be better off by roughly £330. But I was talking to my mum last night. She's a pensioner. And so she said to me, she said, that's all well and good for people who work. But what's he done for the pensioners? And I was like, okay, good comment. I didn't go any further with my mum because I thought, I can see where she's coming from. The next thing she said, that Chancellor said, was in relation to the employment allowance. So the employment allowance is something that employers can take to reduce their employers' national insurance contributions. It's for small and medium-sized enterprises, and there are criteria for who qualifies for it. And he's going to increase the allowance from £4,000 to £5,000 from this 6th April. If I press the right button, it would help. Yeah, there we go. This was the headline grabber, I think, that he said during the speech. So the Chancellor has pledged that he will reduce the basic rate of income tax from 20% to 19% from 2024. The Chancellor also mentioned in there that they have included this in all of their forecasts, and that it is achievable. IT glitch on the screens. It is achievable within the term of, apologies. It is achievable within the terms of the government. Now, I thought when I saw this, now it was a bit sceptical of me, I've got to say, but as soon as I saw this, I thought, we've got an election in 2024. Now, the date of the election is the beginning of May. But they are looking at potentially dropping the basic rate of tax on the 1st of April, just before the election. Now, I may be a little bit cynical, but that does sound like something that they will tout quite heavily in the future. Let's see what happens. Now, because the spring statement was a little bit light, to say the least, on any tax items, I thought it would be worth us recapping some things that have been previously announced and are still affecting us for the coming year. So running through on the personal tax front, as I mentioned earlier on, the personal allowance for the coming year is £12,570. You may also remember that the Chancellor has frozen allowances and rates. So the £12,570 will be in force until 2025-26. The same thing's happening with the higher rate threshold. So our higher rate threshold is £50,270. Again, this has been frozen until 25-26. Now, I've got to admit, when he was freezing the allowances and thresholds, I thought he was probably going to freeze all of the rates of tax. But he's already announced that potentially we will see a 19% rate in the future. The current rate, though, for anything on non-dividend income, 20%, 40%, and 45%. But let's not forget, when we had the social care levy announced, he also announced, very privately, because it wasn't said at the time, that he would add on 1.25% to the rates of tax on dividends. So from this 6th April, the tax rates on dividends are 8.75%, 33.75%, and 39.35%. How many people thought that we only had roughly 3 late rates of tax? You can see why tax calculations are always good fun. Now, one thing my IT manager said to me when he handed me this control is that if it's not green, which it's not, then shout. So I'm going to shout at our IT manager and say, it's not green. Bear with me for a moment, because I'm not sure what's happening. Oh, we're back. This is why the IT manager comes to these events. Oh, moving on to company taxation. The current rate of corporation tax is 19%. It's been 19% for quite a while, and we've got used to that. But it's going to increase next year to 25%. Now, for small companies, and that's companies with profits under 50,000, they will continue to have a 19% corporation tax rate. Between 50,000 and 250,000, there will be a marginal rate. Above 250,000, it will be at 25%. I had a conversation with someone in our office the other day who's never seen marginal rate calculations. They came to ask me about it in a very negative fashion of, oh, this is so complicated. I started getting very excited because I remember learning marginal rate calculations when we had them before. So it'd be great to see them back again. However, I was looking at this slide yesterday thinking, when this was announced that we were going to have 25% corporation tax, it seemed a long time ahead. Only a year off. It's amazing how fast the time has gone. Over the last 2 years, we can see within a very short space of time that we're going to have much higher corporation tax rates. There will be a lot of planning going on over the next few years. Now, on the capital allowances front, the annual investment allowance is still at £1 million. This is due to end on 31st of March 2023, when the annual investment allowance at the moment is due to drop to 200,000. We've also got the super deduction, which is still in place. This is a 130% allowance on qualifying expenditure. Qualifying expenditure is new plant and machinery. This, again, is due to cease on 31st of March 2023, so only a year off. Now, do note that the super deduction is only allowed for companies, it's not for sole traders and partnerships, whereas the annual investment allowance is for sole traders and partnerships. Now, I added research and development to this slide because I remember saying to Tom and others only 6 months ago that they constantly tinker with research and development. Now, they didn't actually do anything in the spring statement on it, but they did mention during the statement that they want to encourage capital investment and research and development. Now, the Chancellor was quite vague in what he was talking about, But what he was saying, that was on the capital investment side, they are going to be looking over the summer at how they can encourage capital investment and further research and development. From the words he spoke, to me, that was saying, in this autumn budget, we are going to see changes to encourage things of capital investment. With the annual investment allowance and the super deduction changing dramatically next March, my predictions are that he will potentially extend the super deduction for a period of time, or he may actually keep the annual investment at the higher level. But what I did think is that we will see some changes, so we should actually have a little bit more to talk about, hopefully, this autumn when we do our next budget presentation. Now, on that note, I'm going to pass over to Tom. Thank you very much.
Stood in the right place. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone at home, and those people who are watching at some point in the future. It will be morning, whenever the time it is. As Amanda said, and as Lexi said, my name's Tom Chiffers. I'm a partner in the private client team at Clarke Willmott. And as my wife said to me last night when she got home from work, what are you going to talk about tomorrow? Well, there were many changes you've seen, so I thought what I'd start with is talking about what hasn't changed. As Lexi and Amanda were saying, the really big topic, the topic that was very conspicuous by its absence on the budget on Wednesday was inflation, price rises. Everyone knows that the cost of living crisis is really significant for everyone, whatever their walk of life. So I thought I'd start with something that got fixed last time and sort of look at it again in the context of that inflation, and especially in prices. So looking at capital gains tax, just to remind everyone, I'm sure most of you know already, capital gains tax is charged when an asset is disposed of, so that's sold or given away, and the rates depend upon what type of asset that is. So if it's residential property, so 18, if you're a low rate taxpayer, 28% for higher rate taxpayers, and then for everything else, 10% or 20%. Everyone has an annual allowance for their tax year of £12,300 for individual, and half of that, £6,150 for a trust. Now, those rates, and more importantly, those allowances have been fixed and will be fixed until 2026. Those are the rates that we had 2 years ago, and they were due to go up. Nowadays, they went up every single year to keep pace with inflation. They haven't, and they won't go up again until 2026. Then on to inheritance tax. Again, as I'm sure most of you know, the rate that most people pay, the rate that's payable when someone dies is 40%. If you make charitable transfers in your lifetime, so trusts, normally it's 20%, that gets topped up to 40% if those transfers are made within 7 years of dying. If you left at least 10% of your estate to charity, then you only pay inheritance tax, inheritance tax 36%. Everyone pays 0% on the value below their nil rate band allowances. Those allowances are listed there. So every individual has a nil rate band allowance of £325,000. Now, that allowance has been fixed since when I was a trainee, so right back in 2009, I think it was the last time that went up. So that hasn't moved, and doesn't look like it's going to move at least until 2026. Any increase in that was sort of nipped in the bud by the financial crisis back in 2008, and was then superseded by the introduction of the residence nil rate band allowance, which came in 2016. Started at £100,000 per person, is now £175,000 per person. And that, again, was due to go up in line with consumer price index from 2 years ago, but has now been fixed and will be fixed until 2026. So just in summary, for a married couple, their combined allowances, because they can combine any unused allowance from the estate of the first person to die, so that's all of it or some of it, with the estate of the survivor, is up to £1 million, but £1 million potentially tax-free when the person dies. So as I said, rates are frozen until 2026. Allowance is also frozen until 2026. Now, as Amanda was saying, we stood here and we talked about inflation perhaps being as high as 5%. We sort of said with a bit of a wry smile, well, we know it's potentially going to top off at least 8.7% later this year. Q4 was what the Chancellor said in his announcement on Wednesday. Q4 it's going to be 8.7%. Now house prices, house prices have been a bit over the last year when we were here before, and certainly we did the very Amanda and I did the very first one of these a year ago, which we did virtually. Stamp duty land tax was a hot topic. The Chancellor had created the stamp duty land tax holiday, which even though the housing market was already heating up because of lockdown and people wanting to get out of the cities into the countryside, it really went absolutely bananas, as my property colleagues will tell you. House price rises zoomed up because the market really overheated. It dropped down, but it has continued strongly, so it's kept going up. So as you can see from the slide there, house price rises have been 9.6, nearly 10% in a year up to 2022, January 2022. So that means with the residence no rate band allowance being fixed at 175,000 or 350,000 for a married couple, that means that in real terms, it's in a 10% deduction, or approximately a 10% deduction in that residence nil rate band, in real terms for people's average house prices versus the residence nil rate band allowance. So I thought what we'd do is look at the residence nil rate band compared to those house prices. As I've said, house prices go up and down. We have peaks and troughs, but generally, as you can see from that blue line there, we've had a pretty steady curve. Obviously, we had a bit of a, should we call it a blip, should we say, in 2008? But it recovered well. It's carried to go on. What I've put there, as you hopefully can see, is the stars represent the implementation and the rate of the residence nil rate band. It came in 2017, came in at £100,000 per person. As I mentioned before, for a married couple, you have 2 lots of allowances. So that meant if you compare the residence nil rate band with average house price, we're just below, for a married couple, their combined allowances were just below the cost of an average house at that time. But, crucially, a year after that, a year after it was introduced, the residence nil rate band allowance went up £25,000 per person. So obviously £50,000 for a married couple. Immediately we jumped above the average house price. So a married couple, they were above the average house price, their combined allowances. Year after that, we jumped up 25,000 again for an individual, or £50,000 for a married couple. Year after that, again, another jump of £25,000 per person, £50,000 per couple. We created so much headroom with those £25,000 per jump that even if I wanted to, I couldn't have put the star on that graph for the combined allowance because it's up to now 350,000, so it's way above. So all of that headroom is created with that introduction. What was supposed to happen, what was due to happen after 2020, or rather starting in 2021, April 2021, was that the residence nil rate band was due to follow the consumer price index. So should, in theory at least, have matched that blue graph. It hasn't. It won't. That red star is going to stay exactly where it stayed, and as you can see, is being left way behind by the blue line. Let's see where it may end up in 2026. So, quick bit of analysis for average house prices. This is what it was in a year ago, April 2020. So, again, comparing that residence nil rate band allowance, 350,000, only 230,000 was the average house price. A lot of headroom there between the difference. Then in this January, that headroom's been heated up. So we've only got 270,000 broadly is the average house price versus 350,000. And then potentially, if we follow the same line on that graph, in April, 2 years' time, we're getting close. 320,000. Then in April, 2 years after that, we will be under. So we're back where we were in 2017 when the residence nil rate band was introduced, which is that the combined allowance for a married couple will be less than the average house price. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, which is, well, you've still got the regular nil rate band. That's true. But by the time we get to 2026, that will have been fixed for the best part of 2 decades without being changed. So we're in a real situation where house prices and all other items, and inflation being as it is, are having a significant real terms deduction in the nil rate band allowances, meaning that many more people who wouldn't, back in 2020, 2021, pay any inheritance tax when they die, are going to be paying inheritance tax. What that means in terms of increased revenue for the government, well, I reused a slide that I used before. I think this is going to be out of date because we didn't have house price rises at 9 points, whatever percent it is, when I put that slide up. They haven't released the figures of what they expect the increased revenue to be. We're seeing that it's going to be, over £900 million increased revenue. If that blue line keeps going up as it has, we had some people following the invasion of the Ukraine rather spuriously saying house price rises might stop or house prices might go down because Russian oligarchs won't be around to spend all their money in London. Obviously that hasn't happened. House price rises continue to be strong, and they will, according to predictions, continue to be strong right up until 2026. Interestingly, when I was looking into what price rises are predicted to be, a lot of people, in fact, all the predictions I saw said 2026 is going to be a cliff. It's going to drop off again. My feeling would be I think you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. As I've seen from the graph, there are peaks and troughs, but it looks like it's going to keep being strong, even if there is a reduction at some point in the future. Okay, so on to something that hasn't changed. There's something that has changed. We've actually got a tax cut. 5% of fuel duty starting yesterday. So fuel duty, interestingly, has not changed. Hasn't changed at all since 2021. Before that, it used to go up, down, different rates for different fuels. 2021, it's been fixed. It's basically been the forgotten tax because it hasn't changed, it hasn't moved, nothing's happened to it since 2021. It stayed exactly where it was. Now it's been cut by 5p in every litre. And it will be it will be frozen for 22 to 23. So it's going to stay where it is for the tax year coming up. We put in the previous slide how much the freezing of the rates and the allowances for inheritance tax is going to generate for the revenue. Excuse me. The cut for the fuel duty is supposedly going to cost the Treasury 2.4 billion. So we see really there's a perfect demonstration of how small fry inheritance tax is for the revenue compared to fuel duty when cutting 5p, supposedly you're going to cost them 2.4 billion. In the context of the trillions that Amanda was talking about, and the amount just for the interest, it again seems quite small. So this is the actual rate of fuel duty. So it was 0.5795, so nearly 58p per litre. It's now 5295, so just under 53p per litre. Now, fuel duty is very different to other taxes. Most taxes, almost all other taxes, are charged on a percentage. The percentage of the amount that someone earns or the amount that they make from a particular transaction or the amount that they spend on something. Fuel duty is just fixed as a fixed amount per litre. So it doesn't change whether your prices go up or down. It's just fixed. Whatever the amount that the other costs are, it stays the same. But how does that actually translate into the amount that we're paying at the pumps? So supposedly, for everyone filling up a 55-litre family car, that's going to save £3. So every time you fill up, it's going to save you £3, supposedly. What are the projected savings? Well, for the average car driver, it's going to save you £100. You can imagine most of you thinking how much your fuel prices are going to go up over the next 12 months. probably a bit more than £100. But anyway, £200 for the average van driver and £1,500 for a haulier. So obviously they're going to see the big savings. But, obviously fuel prices are the real key for them. Interestingly, a lot of people before the budget were calling for a reduction on VAT or removal of VAT on fuel. Lots of people, very few people were talking about a cut in fuel tax. What people wanted was a cut in VAT. Same for people wanted a cut in VAT on heating. Supposedly, that would have generated an extra £1 in every excuse me, in every litre, in every tank of fuel. £4 rather than £3. So obviously that would have meant more savings. But that hasn't happened. So let's work out what that means. Well, let's really analyse how much every pound we put in, every litre we put into the pump. Where does that go? Well, we've been talking about fuel duty, and this slide I found quite helpful trying to get my head around it. Sort of breaks it up into blocks. The bigger the block, obviously, the more of the representation of the cost. So for every pound, 35p supposedly is fuel duty, 33p cost to the supplier. So the biggest block is fuel duty. So despite the fact that it's fixed, it's a fixed amount, that represents the biggest cost. When we fill up our cars, when we pay for fuel, that is the biggest cost. VAT, which is charged at 20%, represents 17% of the total cost per litre, per pound that we spend. The actual cost of petrol, which is the thing that's really driving the increase at the moment with everything that's going on, and before the invasion of the Ukraine, pushing the prices up, that only represents a third. So everything else, fuel duty being the biggest one, represents the biggest cost. So you could say that, well, if you cut the biggest element, which is fuel duty, then you're likely to make the biggest saving. Well, it wasn't met with universal acclaim. That's an understatement for the cost to fuel duty. The RAC said, the prices as they are, it's just going to put us back a week. So it doesn't look like the cost to fuel is going to start going down anytime soon. It doesn't look like the geopolitical issues that are, to put it politely, that are pushing the cost of fuel up are going to go anywhere away soon. Looks like we're in for the long haul with Ukraine, and it looks like also the difficulties of getting fuel, the difficulties of being supplied fuel, aren't going to go away anytime soon. So this is a quick analysis of where petrol prices were. So just over a year ago, we were at 124p for unleaded and 129p for diesel. That went up a bit, a fair amount, 20p over the year. So in January, that's where we were. So we were already seeing price rises even before the invasion of Ukraine happened. And then we jumped. We had a year's worth of growth in nearly 3 months due to the invasion of Ukraine. So we basically had a year's increase in 3 months between January and March. So if that keeps going, that 5% cut, as the chap from the RAC said, not going to make very much difference to anyone at all. So, quick reminder on VAT, we didn't have any changes to these regular VAT rates, but just to remind everyone, because we're in the middle of a sort of transition or cuts that were introduced as a result of the pandemic. So, standard rate of VAT, as it has been for a while, is 20%, but there were temporary cuts to VAT on certain things to try and get us all out again. Get us out spending money at restaurants and other things. So accommodation, tourist attractions, food, there was a cut, and that was cut right down to 5%, and that from the 1st of October went up from 5 to 12.5%, and then from April, so from next week, that will go from that 12.5% up to the usual rate of 20%. So, as Amanda and Lexi were saying, COVID and pandemic lockdowns were conspicuous again by their absence. This is the sort of last vestiges of help that industry was given, or the tourist industry was given, and that's going. So as of the 1st of April, we're where we were pre-pandemic. What has been cut, though, on VAT is something called energy-saving materials. So this was a hot topic even before the invasion of the Ukraine, and that is, how are we going to solve our energy security, and how are we going to move away from fossil fuels? Lots of discussion, lots of consternation about how we're going to do it, because we are fundamentally absolutely addicted to fossil fuels in terms of the provision of our heating and our lighting and everything. So ESMs, what they are, is things that attempt to address that issue. With solar panels, heating pumps, I must confess that I didn't know what heating pumps were. You might have seen sort of a year or so ago, the government announced what is going to be the great successor, gas boilers. What is going to take the place of gas boilers when they're banned in the future, when they're no longer produced in the future? A lot of people thought it's going to be hydrogen, because I guess that's a sort of replacement of gas for another fuel. Actually, heat pumps. It turns out I'd seen heat pumps all over the place, walk past them all the time. Those things on the side of the buildings, and they pump heat in. I just didn't know what they were, so forgive my ignorance. Roof insulation is the final one. So the rate will go down from 5 to 0%. So there won't be any VAT on those items: solar panels, heating pumps, roof insulation. But back in 2027, it'll go back up to 5%. So as I talked about, it's a topic that is trying to be addressed for a while. The aim of this reduction is to try and increase demand, try and help suppliers and help customers who want to purchase these items, to incentivise them doing so. Historically, you did have this reduced rate, so the rate at 0% was only in certain circumstances. So if people were on benefits, or it was for housing associations, or if the cost was the cost of supply represented 60% of the total value, you could have 60%. Now they've done away with those rules. It's just 0% for everyone until 2027. So, on that note, I'll finish and hand over to Lexi to field any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom, and thanks, Amanda, as well. So there's the opportunity now to make sure I'm in the box, to take questions from the room. And for those of you that are joining us online as well, if you're logged in using your Google account, then you can ask a question as well, and that will pop up on the screen here. So are there any questions that anyone would like to kick off with? It's like a very comprehensive presentation, if not. Please do, yes.
So National Insurance and PAYE, current new arrangements, if you're earning £12,000 a year, say, £1,000 a month regularly, you don't pay income tax or national insurance. But if you're a seasonal worker and you earn your £12,000 in 3 months, say, then you will still be paying national insurance. Am I right?
Good question, Amanda. Do you want to take that one?
And part two, Amanda, to that is, and therefore, is there an opportunity for a further change to bring the two calculations together? And would that make it significantly simpler for employers?
You are completely right, yes. So the calculation of national insurance for anyone who's not a director is done on a monthly basis. So if you have got seasonal workers where they are earning £12,000 within a 3-month period, yes, they will pay national insurance because they go over in each of the 3 months that they're working. That is different for directors. So directors do have an annual pay period for national insurance. Do I think they will change that so that everyone has an annual national insurance? No, I don't. The reason they do it that way is because it can catch things when you pay bonuses. So no, I don't think they will make that change. And I think they'd probably say the reason they don't need to is because the software does it for you. But I agree, it does feel a little bit wrong when you've got someone who earns that amount in 3 months has to pay national insurance, whereas if you earn it over a 12-month period, you wouldn't have to. But you are completely right. Any other questions from anyone?
I've got one on here, actually. Sorry, can I borrow that? I've got actually a very similar question that's been submitted online, which hopefully should appear on screen. There we go.
Yes, on there.
On there, perfect. So very similar. Does the NI threshold increase mean that directors should take a larger basic salary before dividends rather than the usual 8.5k?
Excellent question. It's what went straight through my mind. And I said, I was sat round the table with my colleague Rebecca over there when we were listening to the budget. And as soon as he announced this, the first words out of my mouth were, oh, next year we'll be making directors a salary of £12,570. Now, I was wrong with the amount because it's being introduced from July. We would be looking at director salaries at £11,000, I think it was £908 if I remember correctly. But yeah, you are completely right. If you are looking at your structure or withdrawing profits by salary and dividends, then you will look to up that level. But just watch your employer's national insurance, because remember, employer's national insurance thresholds are lower. But you do have the employment allowance for employers. So just watch your thresholds.
Any other questions? Stuart?
Yeah, Tom, on the question of the residence nil rate band, I agree completely about the effect of house price inflation. But other assets, portfolios have held up reasonably well in value at the moment. But one presumes, and am I right in thinking, that we've still got the £2 million threshold, so that in addition to the house price going up and the actual 350,000 per couple being less adequate, so will we get closer to the 2 million total for families, and then that starts tapering away. Is that right?
No, you make a really good point, and that is something that is actually often overlooked with the residence nil rate ban. People think, and to put it into context, it was put in to follow a promise by the Conservatives way back in 2010. They didn't get elected. They got elected in the coalition. They said they would put the nil rate band up to £1 million. What they actually did was the residence nil rate band, which is a bit of a fudge. And the £2 million threshold that you're alluding to is if your total assets, irrespective of any exemptions or anything you have, is more than £2 million, then that residence nil rate band, which as I said on the slides is £175,000 per person or £350,000 for a married couple, will start to stagger down. If your total assets are £2.7 million, then you won't have any residence nil rate band at all. So as Stuart said, a really good point, which is if your other assets, just like house prices, will go up, then you might lose your residence nil rate band at all, which it would have been fixed, but because of everything, including your house going up in value, then you might lose or at least have reduced that residence nil rate band balance.
Thank you, Tom. Any further questions? Oh.
I thought from an environmental and green energy perspective, the statement was a nudge in the right direction. Were you surprised there wasn't some form of windfall tax against fossil fuel producers?
Oh, who would like to say that one?
Certainly lots of people called for it, Dale, is what I would say. Certainly Labour called for it. They called for it on Wednesday. They called for it before. That the argument against it is that it isn't a sustainable long-term objective. So it really depends on how you perceive the issues. Is this a short-term blip, or is this a long-term issue? I think the reality is that some of the reasons why there have been so many difficulties with fuel prices and other things is that this nettle hasn't been grasped at all for the last 20 years. So although we aren't in, as bad a situation as, say, Germany, we're wholly reliant, or almost wholly reliant on Russia for their gas. We're still reliant on fossil fuels, so we're still dictated to by those prices. So I think a windfall tax would have been popular. No one's going to say that they want to see all of the directors and everyone else at BP and Shell. But the reality is, if you dig into the service, everyone in this room, everyone's pension owns shares in Shell and in BP and everything. So what we would be doing is eating into those dividends, which are paying, as Stuart talked about, investments are going up. So yes, I was surprised. I thought he might do it, but it doesn't really correspond with the way that he approaches things, which is conservative with a small c, isn't it? He's not going to do anything too outrageous. But the truth is, the issue has been brought to the fore in terms of energy security. This country, we had shale gas talked about and kicked down the road. We have lots of things talked about. The Severn estuary arrangement, which was going to generate, what was it, 5 or 10% of the total cost for the country, that got kicked down the road. So I think this current crisis is sort of putting these things back to the fore. So I think that, to my mind, is where the attention needs to be, rather than short-term windfall tax, as popular as that would have been with the general public. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Tom. Any further questions? Lovely. Okay, well, that probably concludes things for today. So I think it just leaves it to me to thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Thank you very much to our speakers, Amanda and Tom. Fantastic presentations. And, enjoy the rest of this lovely day and your weekend. Thanks very much, everyone.